Welcome, everyone. It's great to be back. And it's my privilege and pleasure to welcome Dr. Robecca Quammen, who is co-founder and CEO of HealthITq and of Quammen Healthcare Consulting. Becky, it's great to have you.
Great. Thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. So there's a lot to talk about. We recently conducted a survey, and we did very well in terms of responses, and we are using it to create our very first healthcare executive handbook around patient engagement and the patient experience. So let's talk a little bit about a few of the results that I know you have some thoughts on. Interestingly, nearly 42%, which is nearly half of survey respondents, told us that they're already moving forward to integrate their patient engagement or patient experience strategy in their organizations, while another 40% say they've begun working on the patient experience. That's high. That's 82% who say they're doing something or have done something. And of course, it's subjective because they get to decide, outsiders don't. So they're telling us they're wearing the color blue and we don't get to see whether they are or not. What do you think of those results?
I think those results are probably fairly accurate and probably maybe even low. Folks are focused today on patient engagement because they're trying to return to a pre-pandemic level of business and working to engage a population of patients and physicians, honestly, to come back into the fold, to reschedule those surgeries, to carry on the business that was happening pre-pandemic before we went to just necessity. I do find it interesting, and possibly there's a whole new set of leaders involved in the responses to these questions, because we've been at this discussion about patient engagement and patient experience since 2001 with the Institute of Medicine's Crossing the Chasm. So it's I did a little bit of Google research before we got on this call just to remind myself of some dates. And sadly, we've got a couple of decades behind us of time that we should have been focused on these things and were, but now it's heightened with the current climate.
Yeah, and I remember writing a cover story on the empowered consumer in 1991. So these conversations are not new. You're absolutely
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
Exactly. So what was interesting, one of the results that I found most interesting was 2/3 of respondents said we asked them what the biggest obstacle was to advancing in this area. And among we gave them choices, and among the choices were finances, et cetera, but they actually said, 2/3 said goals and objectives competing for time and attention are the biggest obstacle that they've been facing. That's a really interesting answer. What do you think it means?
For me, I think it comes right back to what I just answered in the first question. Is there's a survival notion going on right now. Organizations need to get people back in the door, and so there's a lot of energy in a lot of different ways to define service lines, to attract the surgeons and those folks that would come back into the operating suites, and the discretionary medicine that would occur. There's a lot of competing interest in those things. And then we had so much time when we were working remote and people were away from the office. They're not back at the office now. They're not back except for the hands-on clinicians. Many of them are still remote, and we're dealing with that and the Great Resignation. And so there's staffing shortages. There are certainly budgetary constraints, but there are also the need to catch up again, to right the ship and get back into the business of business. And we were just in this place where we were caring for the COVID patients and trying to survive that world.
Yeah, it's understandable. I mean, it's all hands on deck. I just spoke yesterday with someone who is the director of population health at a major health system, and she's a physician, and she was pulled back into direct patient care.
Mhm.
they
Yep.
needed her on the front line. So
I
yeah,
had this. I had the same experience. I was visiting with a client hospital in Burlington area in the last few days, and speaking to their clinical informaticists, RNs, who themselves had been pulled back in, and they used the term deployment in our discussion. And when we started talking, and they said deployment, I'm like, oh, that's great. So where were you stationed? But they were talking about being redeployed in their own organization to
yeah,
clinical care from their informatics roles. So
right.
again, it's all hands on deck.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Were you a gunnery sergeant, or were you, you know?
Exactly. Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
so what we also learned, survey respondents told us that the three biggest elements of importance in developing a patient engagement and patient experience strategy have turned out to be developing a coherent overall strategy, succeeding in increasing or improving patient retention or brand stickiness or loyalty, and raising patient satisfaction scores. It was interesting that they did not consider improving relationships with clinicians or successful marketing messaging to patients to be among the top considerations for them. What do you think of that?
I think marketing messaging is probably light for hospitals, but they need the physician affinity. They need the physicians to bring the patients back to them, and then when the patients come back to them, they need to have experiences that make them inclined to return. Most physicians practice in multiple places, so there's choice when it comes to where you might go for things, for services. I think that digital front door that everybody's worried about now is a critical thing, being able to engage the patient in their care by having that front door that allows some ease of use that also feeds into the patient experience, their own scheduling, remote access to things, information, education, that sort of thing. And there are a number of companies springing up, bringing those sorts of things. So the direct, they might have answered the question thinking about direct marketing and direct
Yeah.
things like that, but the digital front door is in fact marketing. And so as they're using LinkedIn and as they're using other methods to create access to their system that didn't exist before, so way beyond the website that every hospital has, is something that the patient can actually engage with and not just passively look at.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that has come out in my reporting for the Patient Engagement Executive Handbook has been everyone agrees on one thing: the definition of marketing is having to change. You know, I think some people who've been around a very long time are still thinking about printed flyers that you hand out to people, promoting the bake sale or so. And it's way, way, way beyond that now. We know, and I think the pandemic has been so interesting. Of course, it's been incredibly difficult for the whole world, but it's been interesting because it has awakened consumers to a certain extent. They realize they have more choice now, and they realize they have more control actually in how care is delivered to them. So they're going to be looking around.
That's right. That's right. And, fear as a motivator, a lot of people don't want to engage with an organization that they don't feel is a safe organization now more than ever. And of course, almost every topic we could bring up has been examined in the last 2 decades. The patient experience, the HCAP surveys that we've been doing in hospitals for many, many years, since like 2006, 2008, that became required. So we've been focused on these things, but almost as just a regulatory nuisance that needed to be addressed and not really putting it into action. But I think making smarter consumers, making more access for the consumer is a critical thing, and thinking of them as consumers and not just patients who
Exactly.
have a need in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about analytics, data and analytics. Everyone surveyed agreed that data and analytics were important. I mean, I think it's self-evident. It would be weird if people said, no, data doesn't matter,
Yeah.
in this. But they did all say basically that data analytics matter. From your standpoint, what is it that our audience needs to understand about the role of data and analytics in this process, in this journey?
Yeah, I think, you and I have had this conversation several times before, and that I have a pretty jaded response to what we call analytics and what we call data and artificial intelligence, and being able to let the systems tell us what we need to know as opposed to presuming we know. So when we have folks across an organization, any healthcare delivery system, requesting reports from people that are going out and querying flat data, I mean, that's not going to be adequate to get where we need to go. We need to combine financial data with clinical data in a platform that allows us to let the data tell us what's going on, as opposed to assuming we know. And I think we're very immature in that. I think the largest of institutions out there have crossed that gap pretty nicely with things that they're doing. But I think that there's probably 50% of the smaller independent, multi-hospital but not large organizations that haven't crossed that area.
Yeah.
Hiring the right talent to help facilitate that is another big issue in this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a whole discussion in itself.
Right.
And what's interesting is what I'm finding in our reporting is, as in every other area that we report on, the people in the most advanced organizations are the ones who most acknowledge that they're early on in their journey, which I think
Yes.
is right, like, which is really, really great that they do. Um, so tell us, what is this whole landscape going to look like in the next couple of years? How will this journey unfold? What do you see? Show us your crystal ball, if you would.
Well, I don't know my crystal ball. I think, what I'm experiencing right this minute is what I think others in the industry call the hype sensation, or the hype curve, where we get very, very engaged around something in healthcare, and then it wanes and it falls off over time. I think this one, this pandemic and our response to it, and the blow that it has struck in healthcare, probably will have more of a lingering effect, and it will keep us more motivated to keep looking at those solutions. I think the hype that will fall away will be, do we create whole new C-suite positions? Do we, the first thrust at everything we ever do is always so exaggerated, and I believe that will continue for a little bit longer. There's new entrants to the marketplace. There are companies that are solely focused with a digital perspective on patient engagement in a way that we've never seen before in this industry. So I think there's going to be tons of new entrants into the industry. Probably some bad hiring that happens, and then some reset to get the right people in to be able to use those tools and to change the way we think about marketing and thinking about access to the consumer and how to manage those relationships. And then at the end of the day, even with all of these things going on, we still have sick people in beds that we need to care for. And technology is great in assisting in doing that from a diagnostic perspective. So I try to not lose sight of the fact that this is a people business, and that we need to pay attention to the fact that we do have families and loved ones and patients in beds.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the fundamentals, and hopefully, you kind of obliquely reference the Gartner hype cycle, and hopefully we don't fall into the trough of disillusionment, because I think it's possible we might not fall into the trough of disillusionment per what you just said. We've got so much work ahead, and everyone knows that where this is leading, or should be leading, is a new form or new forms of engagement and new forms of the patient experience. And no one's against that. So at least there's that, right?
Right. Exactly.
Do you feel hopeful overall?
I do. As a practitioner touching, many sites and many events and things, I'm disappointed frequently, but I am hopeful always. I've been at this for all of my career, approaching 4 decades. And even though I still talk about the fact that we have MPI numbers that we can't, assign uniquely to patients without making errors, Even though I face those kinds of challenges, I am hopeful because the top end of the spectrum is so full of opportunity if we can just leverage it.
Absolutely. I
Yep.
agree completely. Well, it's
Yep.
been so great to converse with you today.
Yes, great to talk to you too.
Thank you. Thank you for your wisdom, your insights, Dr. Robecca Quammen. It's been great to speak with you. And thank you to those in our audience who have participated by viewing this. This concludes today's session. Thank you.
Thank you.